Good day, students, and welcome to another lecture on research methodology in history. Today, we will be learning about the historical understandings regarding certain concepts surrounding dream and death. Dream and death occupy shadowy spaces in human culture and consciousness. They are situated at the borders, inherently liminal spaces that fall outside everyday perception. Dreams inhabit the worlds of sleep when a person is unconscious and only makes itself felt through fuzzy, ambiguous memory that often fades too quickly. And death is the great unknown. While various religions and cultures have framed elaborate theories about death and the afterlife, its very nature ensures that it remains unknown to all. The very forbidding mystery surrounding these concepts ensured that they have been held in awe by all cultures. They have found their places in religion, in popular imagination, and in creative production. In this discussion, we shall try to tease out the nature of these concepts in historical outline. So, first, let us go to dream. Dreaming, according to David Shulman, is a cultural act. The dream itself remains out of reach for everyone except the dreamer. And even for the dreamer, it is not a direct experience, but mediated through half memories and partial recollections. But dream reporting, that is, talking about the dream in the waking world and the way these reports are interpreted, encoded, and expressed, are mediated entirely by cultural themes, patterns, and meanings. Thus, there are specific cultures of dreaming, and each culture makes certain culturally specific assumptions about dreams. Thus, the dreams may reveal information about the past or the future, may comment on the relation between an individual and society, and may even articulate the anxieties of the dreamer. Thus, dream reporting is never a neutral act. The way the dream is remembered and understood by the waking self, the way it is expressed to others, and is talked about in general, is reflective of and necessarily embedded in culture. This method of understanding dreams is fundamentally alien to the psychoanalytic tradition of Freud. It attempts to understand dreams in the context of different religions and cultures and proceeds with the assumption that dreams are strongly influenced by culture and religion. Thus, this research tries to unearth the differences in cross cultural patterns of dreaming. This helps researchers to step outside modern ways of understanding dreams that see it as a private act and instead highlight the approaches of different people and cultures in history. Thus, for example, the Mayan culture of Central America saw dreaming as one of the most important and powerful acts. There are other cultures who have banished dreams to the margins. Thus, let us now take a look at how dreams have been regarded in history. Dreams were important in ancient China. In the Zhuozhuan or the Zhuo commentary tradition, dating from the 5th century BCE, dreams are one way to structure events and impose order on human experience. They are vital to understanding causality and often take the shape of symbols and voices of advice or warning. Dream representation was a major activity, and this was done to understand causality. themes of control and order are recurring. Thus, in situations where a dream shows ritual disorder between the human and the spiritual world, properly interpreting the dream can help restore order. Interpretation was an absolutely vital part of dreaming, as dreams with arbitrary injunctions and dreams that need to be decoded indicate a loss of control. And it was only through ingenious interpretation that control could be reasserted. Dream and interpretation of a dream could also have a public dimension, as shared dreams were often seen as verification of the reality of dream. In Taoist and Buddhist philosophy, it is talked about that the dreamer using dreams to achieve renunciation. Thus, if they can dream of the lives lived within the dream with all the associated passions, then these are proven to be illusory and unreal, and therefore should be treated with detachment. In ancient Indian Hindu culture, dreams were not only just important, they were a very serious matter. The key to understanding dreaming in Hinduism is to understand the Hindu concept of Maya. The entire material universe is thought to be Maya, or an illusion created by God for the pleasure and the sport of God, which is also known as Leela. Thus, the universe itself is a dream dreamt by God. Thus, the dreams of human beings can be synchronized with the dream of God and can constitute one of the most reliable methods for perceiving the reality of the universe. The general idea that the world is Maya or an illusion is not easily perceived. We can only sense it through minor mistaken perceptions or bhroma. Dreams too can act as mistaken perception and can impart to the dreamer crucial transcendent information about their waking life. Among the Native Americans, dreams are important parts of cultural form and ritual. Dreams and visions are seen as arenas of cultural representation and contact. Dreams may provide a space for contact between the living and the dead, but the nature of this interpretation is modified by individual cultures. Thus, in the American Southwest, the Zuni people do not usually seek to contact the dead, but the medicine men and women of the Zuni and the Navajo Piotists actively seek contact with the dead when they dream or go into trances. In Brazil, in the Zavante culture, contact with the dead through dream varies with gender and age. While all women may share their dreams through singing, the representation of male dreams is different. While adolescents learn the composition of dream songs by observing their elders, the older women of the tribe speak of directly contacting the dead. Dream narration is often interpreted through mythological narratives. Dream narratives can even be large public rituals. The Aguaruna people of Peru have formal dream telling performance called dream declarations. The various cultures of dreaming among the people of America are informed by numerous theories and practices. These theories are directly linked to social action and are interpreted or employed in different ways by different individuals. In ancient Greece, dream and dream interpretations were crucial in a number of situations. dream was considered to be a mode of divine communication. Dream could be the medium through which the god reached out to cure the sick or gave them instructions on how to be cured. Physicians like Hippocrates and Galen tried to evaluate dreams while diagnosing patients. Philosophers like Aristotle, the Stoics, the Epicureans tried to explain dreams and came up with different interpretations. Thus, dreams might come from external influences, from the gods, from the mind of the dreamer, or due to the bodily functions of the dreamer. Interpreting the future through dreams was very important, and professional dream interpreters existed for this purpose. Interpreting the future through dreams was known as oneiromancy and has been classified as inspired divination. This was considered to be so important that there were special religious sanctuaries where people slept in the hope of dreaming. The Greco Roman tradition of dream interpretation came to its zenith under Artemidorus of Ephesus. He was an extremely erudite man, and his book, the Oneirocritica, is absolutely vital to understanding the history of dream and dream interpretation in this period. In this book, he presented a profile of the perfect dream interpreter. The first and second books focus on the theoretical implications of dream interpretation, followed by a catalogue of dream elements and their possible contextualization. The third and fourth books are replies to critics and also an attempted synthesis between dream elements and waking life. The fifth book describes the content of nearly 100 dreams. This book, which was preserved through Byzantine and Arab sources, and from the Renaissance down to the 18th century, was seen as the most sophisticated study of dreams and was regularly consulted by dream theorists. Compared to pagan dream culture, early Christian dream culture in antiquity is ambiguous. There was a conflation between dreams and visions, and thus these two phenomena need to be studied together. Visions were often reported in the same way as dreams. This combination of dreams and visions was also practiced by the early Christians who took this approach from the Old Testament. Dreams and visions were seen as important tools in the Christian struggle against the cosmic evil represented by Satan. Dreams could also reflect power struggles in support of or against particular interpretations and sources of revelation and religious authority. They were also ways of showing direct contact with the divine bypassing church authority. Dreams and visions were also related to conscience, guilt, and penance. Christian visions were also important for the construction of Christian mysticism, with dreams being seen as religious experiences. In the medieval West, the church and the clergy had taken on a mediatory role between human beings and the divine. Dreams, however, held out the promise of immediate and direct access to the transcendent, and thus bypassed this structure. Thus, the dreams showed the limits of ecclesiastical power regarding the control of individual religious experiences. Though the clergy were not fully marginalized, they continued to act as dream recorders and dream interpreters. Medieval scholars derived their framework for dream study from two sources: the Greco Roman heritage and the biblical heritage. Attempts were made to interpret dreams as auspicious or inauspicious, happy or unhappy, hostile or peaceful, etc. There was a basic mistrust of dreams. While it was desirable that saints, kings, monks, and clerics enjoy truthful dreams from God, this was less important and even undesirable for the poor, for the illiterate, and for women. This entire interpretive structure was based upon a dualistic worldview: God and the devil, true and false, king and commoner, church and lay people, male and female, etc. Islamic tradition conveys the idea that while prophecy has ceased with Muhammad, dreams can still convey divine messages. These dreams in Islam are legitimate vehicles for the divine, and this greatly opened up the potential for mysticism and philosophy. The Sufis believed that divine inspiration could therefore be granted to the devout followers of God or holy men of Islam through dreams. In Islamic philosophy, it was declared that during times of sleep or deep contemplation, when the senses are suspended, the human being could become closer to God and access transcendental truth through dreams and visions. It was universally accepted that through cultivating the inner faculties, it was possible to receive dream messages. Thus, dreams and dream interpretation were very important topics of study in Islam. Some of their ideas came from older Jewish sources, and others from ancient Greece and the Hellenistic civilization. Thus, there were encyclopedic compilations of dream study in Arabic. In the modern West, unquestionably, the most famous paradigm of dream study is that of Sigmund Freud and his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. In this book, Freud locates his efforts in the long continuity of dream study from antiquity. However, through methodological analysis, he also tries to show that his own theories are radically innovative and thus totally different from any effort that may have preceded him. He argues that his theories are completely different from the theories of the psychiatric school that saw dream as biological processes, and the ancient concept of dream being supernatural intervention. He declared that if dreams were purely physiological processes, they would have no inherent meaning. Rather, he declared that they were part of the psychic life of the individual and could therefore have meaning. The message they convey is not from a divine source, but from the mental world of the dreamer. Thus, Freud placed the source of the dream within the human subject rather than outside, and thus located himself within the traditions of Western modernity. Freud was conscious that by assigning meaning to dreams and trying to interpret them, he was, in a sense, reaching back to the tradition of dream interpretation of pre modern times. This did not, however, mean his adoption of pre rational forms of thought, but rather their integration into his own work. And with that, we have come to the end of our discussion on dream. Now we shall start our discussion on death. Human beings have been aware from the very beginning that death is a final, universal fate of all. Each culture and civilization in history has had multiple elaborate rituals and ceremonies surrounding death. Many cultures shared the belief that death was not the end, that some vestige of human beings, an essence or a soul, survived in an afterlife. Beliefs in this afterlife varied from the Elysian fields of ancient Egypt to the Valhalla of the Viking warriors to salvation with God in heaven in Abrahamic religions to nirvana in Buddhism. Man's obsession with death has been universal and has inevitably attracted philosophical attention. Hegel remarked that history was what man does with death. Of all the species, it is man alone that surrounds the act of dying with so much ceremony and builds complex belief structures surrounding the afterlife. In this context, W. B. Yeats' remark that man has created death is very apt. Death beliefs and practices that have developed through history have been influenced by environmental, social, religious, and spiritual factors. Environmental factors include climate, predators, food and water supply. Social factors include practices of socialization, class structure, governmental structure, and the social practices for caring for the dead. In prehistoric times, death was common and human life expectancy was very low. Death could come as a result of injury or illness. Child mortality was high due to sporadic and insufficient nutrition and rudimentary medical practices. Thus, death was an accepted part of life. And yet, even in these turbulent times, human beings built rituals and structures around their dead. Archaeologists have discovered many grave sites where the deceased was buried with tools, weapons, jewelry, and other possessions. Sometimes the dead were attired in special clothing. Evidence has been found of elaborate pre death rituals, such as the preparation of the body. Funeral rituals often involved propitiating gods and to honor the dead so they would not haunt the living. In the ancient period, the ceremony around death got more elaborate. Ancient Egyptians devoted a huge amount of time, energy, and resources towards preparing for the afterlife. To them, life was an ephemeral dream, while death was eternal. To enjoy this eternal life, the body had to be preserved. In Egyptian religion, the soul was dual, the Ka and the Ba. The Ka soul remained close to the body after death, while the Ba soul entered the spiritual domain. The dead crossed the river of death to the house of Osiris, from where they could enter eternity. However, this was contingent upon Osiris's judgment of every individual's life. It was believed that the Ba soul would return to the well preserved body eventually. In ancient Greece, the soul was believed to be immortal, and death was its release from the body. The soul preceded the existence of the body, and it would survive it. Some in Greece feared death as they believed that gods or malevolent spirits might harm them in the afterlife. Others saw death as a natural occurrence and one that should be embraced as merely the gateway to another realm of existence. Socrates and Plato thought that the ending of life, when a person's usefulness had ended, was quite acceptable. This calm attitude towards death was exemplified in the way Socrates' death has been depicted. Socrates, who was sentenced to death by hemlock poison, addressed his friends before his death and said And here I will quote Plato's dialogue, Phaedo. And therefore I go on my way rejoicing, and not only, but every other man who believes that his mind has been made ready, and he is in a manner purified. And what is purification but the separation of the soul from the body? I have been told that a man should die in peace. Ancient Roman beliefs regarding death were quite similar to and influenced by the Greeks. They both believed that the dead souls would be ferried across the river Styx. They both believed in the importance of proper burial and respect for the dead. The medieval period saw high mortality rates. Death was common and often violent. The French historian Philippe Aries has done pioneering work regarding death in Europe in his famous book, Western Attitudes Towards Death from the Middle Ages to the Present. In this study, he has highlighted several stages of development regarding the understanding of death. The first stage is from the 6th to the 12th century. The second period is from the 12th to the 17th century, and the third stage is from the 18th to the 19th century. The fourth stage is from the late 19th century to the present day. In the first stage, he regards death as tamed. Here, people were aware of the possibility of sudden death and were prepared for it. He used medieval texts and romances to cite examples where characters face death and realize that their time has come, and thus they prepared themselves through rituals. Thus, the dying person would try to position themselves appropriately. They would be surrounded by their family. Death was seen as normal and not taboo, and thus even the children were present. Bodies were buried in churchyards, but graves were rarely permanent, the bones often being interned in an ossuary later. Burial grounds were not places of fear, but rather common meeting places. From the 12th century onwards, Aries identified changes in the attitude towards death. This was the era of, in his words, one's own death. There was a personalization of death, as it was believed that after death the deceased soul would be judged by the divine authority and sent to heaven or hell. Thus, the moment of death became more important, as it was believed that deathbed conduct could influence the divine judgment. This era saw the growth of tombs with inscriptions. Religious artwork started depicting dead bodies and skeletons. This artwork was supposed to carry a moral message of warning. Death took on a more fearsome aspect in the 14th century, which saw the waning of the medieval period and the start of the Renaissance. This was the period of the terrible Black Death pandemic, which killed as much as 30% of the European population. From the Renaissance to the Reformation, there was a slight improvement in health, with rising life expectancy as medical science advanced. Crucially for Christian views of the afterlife, the Catholic Church announced that the afterlife was not just heaven or hell, but rather there was a third option called purgatory. The 18th and 19th centuries saw another shift in the attitude towards death. Philippe Aries called this period of thy death, where there was more social awareness of death and thus more concern about the death of others. At this time, death was exalted and sometimes dramatized. Death was thought of as being disquieting and greedy. People were now present to mourn the passing of the dying person. Although mourning was practiced in earlier ages as part of the death ritual, it became more dramatic and spontaneous and often was accompanied by excessive displays of emotion, such as wailing. Death was no longer accepted. Death was lamented, and the bereaved preserved the memory of the deceased in rituals and keepsakes. There was an increasing belief in the predestination of the soul. Since nothing could influence the fate of the dead after death, there was no significance to the dead body anymore. Cemeteries, which were referred to as places of sleep since ancient times, were now called the burying place, the boneyard, or the graveyard. In the mid 19th century, Western society entered the period Aries describes as the forbidden death. People began to consider death shameful and forbidden. During this time, death was not openly spoken of, and when someone was dying, they were not told of their pending death. This was justified by trying to spare the person pain. In many ways, we continue this now by isolating the dying from the living and not speaking openly about the death and dying. In contrast to death being exalted or dramatized in the previous period, and the control the dying person could have on his or her dying and death, the forbidden death period took that control away, and the dying were left to the perils of medical practices that were still extremely dangerous without knowledge of germ theory and modern medical science. Attitudes about death and dying began to change during the 20th century, and it became more remote, a subject that was not discussed. During the 20th century, death was normally concealed in hospitals and it became a fearful occurrence. The fear of death and dying, as reflected in that forbidden death idea, was exacerbated by a reduced confidence in organized religious doctrines regarding death and an increase in medical science's intervention in the dying process. Scientific advances also increased the secularization of social and intellectual thought, supplanting religious doctrines. There was less acceptance of death as the inevitable end of life. The poet Dylan Thomas aptly reflected this sentiment in his famous poem, "Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night," which reflected how death should be fought in the modern era. And here I quote him: "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." On that note of rage, we come to the end of our discussion on death. This topic has fascinated the interest of humanity throughout its cultural existence, and doubtless it will continue to do so in the future. There remains much to be said about death, this discussion being merely an introductory one. Thank you.